Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to understanding the ideas that really matter.
And today we're jumping straight into the very first episode of a pretty fascinating podcast, Diedrich Burn's Digital EQ Reimagined.
Exactly. The episode's called The War for Emotional Sovereignty. Our mission here is simple. Unpack the key stuff from that foundational episode.
Right, give you the core insights from Burns himself. He's the creator, emotional strategist, founder of Digital EQ HQ, and now I'm Profit Media.
And his whole goal, really, is to make emotional intelligence, both the traditional kind and the digital kind, feel modern, inclusive, accessible.
Yeah, in this first episode, it really sets the stage. It introduces this big idea, emotional sovereignty, what it means in our digital age, and, well, why it's so important right now.
Okay, so let's get into it. Where does he start?
He kicks it off with this incredibly powerful analogy, really vivid.
The one about being taken from home.
That's the one. Losing identity, community,
Yeah.
but then finding connection, strength even, through that shared suffering. He uses the historical context of enslaved people.
Wow, that's a heavy way to start. How does he connect that to now?
Well, that's the interesting part. He draws this direct line to how we feel today, supposedly hyper-connected with all this tech, but often feeling, well, incredibly isolated.
Right, that paradox. We have all these tools to connect, yet surveys show loneliness is rising.
Exactly. So he poses these big questions right at the start. Why are we more alone? Why do we often suffer in silence?
And he asks us to keep community in mind as we listen. That feels key, especially after that opening.
Definitely. That idea of community becomes a thread throughout the whole thing, and it leads him into sharing his own story.
Ah, so he reveals that the young man he described metaphorically, that was him.
Yeah. It makes it all much more personal, grounds these big ideas in his own lived experience.
So what was his childhood like, according to the episode?
He describes being bright, curious, really empathetic, the gifted child, even mentions having dimples that made people feel safe around him.
Sounds like he was naturally very tuned in to others' feelings.
Very much so. But, and this is relatable for many, the world didn't always see that empathy as a strength. He got labeled too soft, too sensitive.
Ugh, yeah, that happens. So how did he deal with that?
He talks about building a wall, consciously trying to suppress that curiosity, that sensitivity to appear strong, a coping mechanism.
Makes sense. Trying to fit in or avoid judgment. But did it work? Did people stop confiding in him?
Well, here's the paradox he highlights. Even with the wall up, people were still drawn to him. They sensed he could listen, really listen, so they shared their burdens anyway.
So he became the sort of confidant, despite trying not to be.
Pretty much. He uses the word vessel for others' pain. And he's honest about the toll that took. Carrying all that, feeling responsible but unable to fix things, it's a heavy weight.
I can imagine, especially for someone young. Did that experience shape his career path?
It seems like it. He ended up in human resources, a field all about understanding people's pain, their needs. He actually called emotional intelligence his superpower back then.
Finding a place where that empathy was actually valued, maybe.
Possibly. But, even superpowers have limits.
Yep.
All those years of being the go-to, the strong one,
Yeah.
it led to burnout. He calls it empathy fatigue.
What did that look like for him?
A slow withdrawal,
Yeah.
less social media,
Yeah.
not returning messages, feeling numb even when he was around people he loved. Just this gradual disconnection.
That sounds incredibly draining.
And it culminated in what he calls a breakdown. He just stopped reaching out completely, stopped engaging.
Wow.
And then he drops that line, "That young man, it was me." It just hits differently then. You realize his personal journey is the reason for this podcast.
It completely reframes it. It's not just theory, it's deeply personal. He wants to rewrite the narrative around empathy and emotional labor because he lived it.
Exactly. And that personal vulnerability is the perfect bridge to the main concept he wants to introduce, emotional sovereignty.
Okay, so let's unpack that. Emotional sovereignty. It's not just about understanding others' emotions.
No, he shifts the focus inward. It's about reclaiming yourself, your own emotional world, both offline and, crucially, online.
Reclaiming yourself. I like that. So what does that mean practically?
It means your emotions belong to you, not to your boss, not to social media feeds, not to targeted ads that try to manipulate how you feel. It's about ownership.
And he talks about specific rights connected to this sovereignty.
Yes, rights that feel really urgent today, like the right to consent before your emotions are turned into data points.
Okay, that's huge.
The right to feel what you actually feel authentically, without algorithms trying to nudge you one way or another,
Yeah.
and the right to be seen as a person, not just surveilled for profit.
These feel like fundamental rights for the digital age.
And he puts it bluntly, the war for our emotional sovereignty has already started.
Yeah.
He's not mincing words. He's saying we need to pay attention now.
That's a strong statement. So, to help us understand this war, he defines some key terms.
He does. First up, digital emotional intelligence, or digital EQ.
Okay. What's his take on that?
He calls it a GPS for emotions online. Basically, the skill to recognize how digital stuff, emails, feeds, whatever affects your feelings, and then being able to manage that, to regulate and protect your inner world online.
So, it's about awareness and self-management in digital spaces. Makes sense. What else?
Then he revisits emotional sovereignty itself. He uses another analogy here.
Oh, yeah.
He compares it to being the ruler of your own country. Your emotional landscape is that country, and you decide who gets access, who gets influence.
That's a really clear image. Puts you in the driver's seat.
It does. Then he gets into emotional data.
Right. What falls under that umbrella?
He calls it the digital footprint of your inner life. And it's a lot. Likes, comments, how long you look at something, your scrolling habit,
Obvious stuff.
but also subtler things. Biometric signals, maybe from your watch, heart rate variability, facial expressions picked up by cameras, even the tone of your texts.
Whoa. So all these tiny signals paint a picture of our emotional state.
Precisely. And he points out this data is incredibly valuable. It's become a currency for digital platforms, which, naturally, raises concerns about manipulation.
Yeah, if they know how we're feeling, they can potentially influence us more easily.
Which leads directly to the next term, affect computing.
Affect computing. What's that?
That's the tech that actually reads and responds to all that emotional data. It analyzes our emotional states.
So it's the engine interpreting the emotional footprint.
You got it. Examples. Mood-based music or news feeds. Targeted ads that hit you when you might be feeling vulnerable.
Okay, I can see the tension there. It could be helpful. Personalized, maybe?
But it's also a huge threat to our emotional sovereignty, as Byrne sees it. When our feelings become just beta points for profit, that's a problem.
It feels like crossing a line. So why is understanding all this emotional data affect computing so important for us, for the listener?
Because knowledge is power here. Understanding how this works allows you to set boundaries, to maybe demand more ethical practices from tech companies.
And digital EQ helps you spot when your data might be getting mined.
Exactly. It helps you safeguard your digital space, your inner world. He asked these really direct questions like, are you in control of your emotions online, or is your environment shaping them for someone else's gain?
That's a chilling question, really.
And his answer is clear. Emotional sovereignty isn't optional. He calls it non-negotiable.
Okay. After laying out these concepts, where does he go next?
He brings it back to the personal, but also connects it to culture. He talks about vulnerability, specifically as a black man.
Addressing those societal pressures to always be strong, maybe?
Exactly. The pressure to be stoic, silent, and how that impacts emotional well-being. He really challenges the idea that hiding scars is how you heal.
What does he argue instead?
That hiding pain actually obscures our shared humanity. It stops us from connecting over those common struggles.
And he links this back to the idea of community.
Beautifully, yeah. He brings up ancestral wisdom, how community, like singing or weeping together, was literally a survival tool in times of hardship. Shared emotional expression builds resilience.
So he's saying we need that same kind of authentic connection, even in the digital world.
Precisely. That real survival, real strength, isn't about putting up a perfect front online. It's about showing up, honestly, vulnerabilities and all.
He reframes strength, doesn't he? Strength isn't silence. Strength is being honest about your pain and still daring to show up.
That's the quote. It's powerful. And he says his podcast aims to hold space for the soul behind the screen.
That feels like a really important mission.
And it leads beautifully into probably the most moving part of the episode, his poem.
The flower in the rock.
Right.
He introduces it as something very personal.
Yeah, like a journal entry, prompted by thinking about all the emotional weight he carried. He explains the metaphor of the rock first.
The empathetic pillar. The one everyone leans on.
That's it. The one who absorbs everyone else's pain. His poem explores what it feels like to be that rock.
What are some of the themes in the poem?
Suppressing your own needs. Empathy being a double-edged sword, helping others but hurting yourself. He talks about his own flower of self, just withering under that constant weight.
That's such a striking image.
It really is. And there's this realization in the poem about the cost not just to him, but how maybe always being the rock accidentally disempowered the people he was trying to help.
Oh, interesting. That's a complex layer to it.
Definitely. But it ends on a note of hope, balancing strength with vulnerability, nurturing your own flower,
And that image of new strength blooming from the cracks.
like a flower pushing through the rock.
Yeah.
It's about transformation through vulnerability. And then he speaks directly to anyone listening who identifies as the rock.
What does he say?
Just, I see you. Simple but profound. Creates this real connection.
Wow. And the final message from the poem.
We don't protect others by hardening. We protect by growing. It sums up so much of the episode's core message. Growth through openness, not through building thicker walls.
That's a fantastic takeaway. So, wrapping up our deep dive into this first episode.
The main thing, really, is the urgency and importance of this idea of emotional sovereignty in the digital age. We need to be active participants in protecting it.
And remembering Burns' final thought he leaves listeners with?
Stronger emotions, not stronger algorithms. A call to prioritize our humanity over the tech.
Absolutely. So, like Diedrich Burns suggests, maybe take a moment now, take a deep breath, pause.
Yeah, let these ideas sink in a bit.
And here's something to maybe chew on, building on all this. How can we actually build digital communities that foster that real connection Burns talks about? Communities that support us emotionally instead of just isolating us or mining our feelings.
That's a great question. And maybe what's one small thing you could change in your own digital habit starting today to reclaim just a little bit more of your own emotional sovereignty?